I'm your host, Peter Komendowski, and welcome to Surviving Bad, where we explore stories of survival, hope, and inspiration. Today we're looking at the failure of marijuana policy and the disaster that appears to be unfolding. The consequences of promoting drug use without FDA approval, driven by businesses that profit from addiction and utilize seductive misinformation campaigns, advertising, they're really putting our children at risk. Now, over 15 years ago, prevention specialists raised the alarm for an opioid epidemic. And in the beginning, very few people listened. We were late to respond, and over 100,000 Americans died in 2021 as a result. Now the prevention community is raising a new alarm about marijuana, and it might be a good idea to listen. We've invited a couple of prevention specialists to share their views, Pastor Joy Gonerman and Maggie Ballard. Welcome to the show. Let's meet our guest. Joy, let's start with you. Tell us about yourself.
So I'm so happy to be here and have this opportunity. I am, in fact, a Lutheran pastor. I've served several congregations in Iowa and in Minnesota. And most recently, my synodically authorized call is to Rosecrans Jackson Center as a prevention specialist. And mainly recognizing that prevention is about adding resiliencies and protective factors to particularly youth who are at risk for substance use disorders. And that faith communities have a lot that we can do to help with that. In fact, that should be really what our focus is as communities of faith in communities, getting out of our walls, right? Instead of just going to worship on a Sunday morning, feeling good about ourselves, and then waiting till next Sunday to feel good about ourselves again. We are called to be out in the world, to be in places. A lot of people talk about having Jesus in their heart. Well, that's a teeny tiny little Jesus, isn't it? A little Jesus that goes where you want to go, instead of being led into places where, in my tradition, Jesus would have us go, which is to the outcast, the darkness, the shadows, the places where people need to be seen. So I'm very grateful that my call is to Rosecrans for this. And that's, I don't bring up that I'm a pastor as a part of my work. You don't have to. My faith determines how I live. It does not demand how you live. And so when I'm speaking to people, that's sort of the thing I'm trying to help them understand, is that my job is not to convert you. My job is to tell you that you matter. Your voice matters, your future matters, your health matters. And so when I'm talking to kids in juvenile detention, or I'm talking to kids in alternative schools, they need to hear that as often as they can. So there's that. There's the science to it too. As a Lutheran, we love the science. We love the critical thinking, asking questions. I mean, I follow, again, a rabbi who asked more questions than he answered. So that's part of the way that I interact with people in my work.
Well, thank you so very much, Joy. And now, Maggie, tell us about yourself.
Thanks for having me on, Peter. And I enjoy being on here with Joy, because I don't know if I've told Joy this before, but my dad was a pastor, a Methodist pastor. And so I feel comfortable, blending my faith and understanding, where that comes from in everything that I do, when you allow it to, and when you have that be a priority. So I appreciate you being in the prevention field as well. My background is in the criminal justice field. When I was attending college, I really thought I wanted to be a police officer. And I actually have no interest really anymore in doing that. I found the world of prevention and have fallen in love with it. I also, children are very important to me. I don't have any of my own, but I'm a big sister with big brothers, big sisters. I sit on the foster care review board. I'm also very interested in social justice. That's race, equity, things like that are very important to me, especially in today's world. I am the vice president of a large peace organization in Nebraska. So full transparency, I am a Nebraskan, born and raised. I live in Omaha, but I serve over in Council Bluffs is where my office is. And then I serve, Pottawatomie, Mills, and Harrison counties. And I'm just excited to be here today to talk about about what you kind of said in the introduction, with us wanting to focus on how we can do some real prevention, not just the daily work that us prevention specialists do, or the information that we try to share, but really try to sound the alarm so that people in our communities and the counties that we serve will feel just as invested in preventing some of these problems as well. Because like you said, years ago, I remember going to a conference about 7 years ago where we were talking about the opioid crisis. And that was when there was maybe 2 deaths per day. And that was a crisis back then. We've unfortunately really gone past that. So hopefully we can come up with some strategies.
Yeah, we see the same kind of risk emerging with marijuana. We see other states that have gone down the path further down the road than Iowa has, and there's some really bad consequences happening, especially with kids. So we're going to take a short break, and we come back. We're going to continue our conversation with Joy and Maggie and talk about what we see potentially in the future for Iowa and some of the things we might have to do. See you all after the break. You don't want to miss this.
While a lot is changing in our world, at MediaCom, our focus remains the same, making sure you have the fastest, most reliable connection possible. During this critical time, we know your needs are changing. You may be working or learning from home, relying on telemedicine, or finding new ways to keep everyone entertained. If you need more speed, call or go online, and MediaCom will double your speed immediately for as low as $10 more a month for 1 year.
Multiple studies have shown that marijuana can slow both driver reaction and response time, which can be really dangerous. He's here. He's here. Wait. What? I can't drive. Why? My. Oh.
Welcome back to Surviving Bad. I'm your host, Peter Komendowski, and we're talking with Joy and Maggie about social justice, children, marijuana, and public health consequences that could end up hurting a lot of Iowans. There's some science coming in from other states that show that the road we're on in Iowa could be dangerous. Maggie, starting with you, give us a little background on what we're learning about marijuana and those risks in other states.
Sure. I think that what we've seen happen in a lot of states that have legalized, we've seen most of them happen through a ballot initiative where people are casting their votes, right? And I think there's something to be said about our democracy and giving everyone a voice. But I think the problem is that a lot of people, when they cast their vote, they are picturing that we're going to legalize this substance that existed back in the 60s and 70s, your Woodstock weed, if you will. Whereas instead, we're getting these dabs and concentrates where it is so much stronger. We're talking up to 99 times stronger today than it was 40 or 50 years ago, and it's unrecognizable.
And these are being made like in industrial factories and in chemical labs. It's not you're like growing a garden anymore, are you?
Right. When we hear people say that marijuana is just a plant, I think you're naive at best, deeply misinformed, because my thought is, oh, bless your heart. If that was the case, if we were really just talking about a plant that grew out of the ground, we would not be having this discussion.
Now, Joy, how about for you? We talk about this. There's really a lot of big business involved in marketing marijuana, and like other things, tobacco and alcohol, they always sort of make it look innocuous, or even worse, make it look cool. How is this affecting youth in the communities you work with?
Well, there's always the misconception that legal equals safe. And we simply know that's not true on so many levels. But yeah, the idea, in my tradition, again, the love of money is the root of many evils. And so, when these conversations are taking place, there's nobody in our field in prevention or treatment at the table. The people at the table are those that are going to be benefiting from it. And the fact is, kids hate being taken advantage of. And so when you start talking to kids about the way advertising is telling them things that are simply not true, they kind of get their backs up and they start to think about, this appeal to nature. It's a plant. Well, dab, wax, shatter is to marijuana what corn syrup is to corn. I mean, there's a process that separates it from anything that was once natural. And then, we talk about kids are concerned about the environment if they're in a place where that is something they can talk about. And so if they're going to use the appeal to nature, then we also can talk about the detriment to the environment for these growing industries that are using chemicals that are going to cause harm to the environment in which they are grown. So if you're going to appeal to nature, it's important to recognize that it's not just that thing in your hand, but it is a bigger picture than that. And it also makes me concerned for kids that think that they are better than how they are created to be, and that there are ways to deal with anxieties and stresses and issues in their lives better than adding a chemical to as they are created, right? There are methods of managing that rather than using something that sort of pulls you away from the world in which you are. So I think that's the other challenge, is that we all, as Americans, we like a quick fix, right? I mean, we know that we use the vast majority of pain medication in the world, but helping kids to recognize they're empowered to seek help for anxieties and other mental health issues, rather than just adding a chemical to their brain that's going to make it worse in the long run, which never
Maggie,
seems to come out in the advertising.
Well, no, Maggie, I have a question for you, because I know you're pretty adept at this, and I was at a meeting that you were at listening to bureaucrats speak. We started out with a CBD program that everybody sold as being like the natural thing, 3% CBD, 3% THC. And now that program has become nothing but a THC program, which fuels addiction. And the people that started that program, which is run by the state, some of the players are complaining that our new hemp program, which is now that product with 3% or less THC and CBD, which for the most part, nobody's going to argue with. Now they're saying that's a threat to their income, because so they should get more subsidies and have more help growing their business of addiction. And looking at even places like Canada, we've researched this and found that most of the marijuana made there is out of a chemical lab. They don't have to grow it anymore. They can create it. So now it's a dangerous pharmaceutical drug. The large businesses people want people to invest in to make money on marijuana are being made by big business. And it's taken a hold in places like, California, Washington, other states and other places. Iowa's in the beginning of this. What do you think Iowans need to know, or what can they do to stop this plague from hitting us and our kids?
To stop this plague from hitting us, my bottom line, the way I look at it is this. One of the hats I wear is prevention specialist. One is big sister. One is a daughter. All these other hats I wear. Who I am, first and foremost, and this might sound weird to people who are not in recovery, but I am and always will be an alcoholic, and usually a recovering alcoholic, and that's how I plan to be. And one of the things that we see happen for people who have a problem is they don't get the help until they have hit rock bottom. And I would like to see our state stop before we hit rock bottom, because you hit your bottom when you quit digging. So let's not wait until we see all of these horrible things happen to our children and the things that have happened in other states. Let's not wait for that. Let's go ahead and listen to the science and the experts and call those things into question.
That's a great point. We're going to take a short break, and afterwards we're going to ask Joy and Maggie to look at how this is almost like history repeating itself, like tobacco, alcohol, and even the opioid epidemic. Stay tuned. You don't want to miss this.
The black truck? Hey, Christina from accounting.
Yeah, hi.
Hey, I used to date a girl named Christina.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and then she dumped me for my best friend. You want to see some photos of them that I took?
I don't.
I thought we talked about this, buddy.
Buzzed and overshared again?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm gonna call a car.
That's a smart idea.
So yeah, I know, that's why I did it.
Hey, you're gonna get back to the top of the mountain.
Does that mean I'm gonna get back with Christina?
No.
Oh.
No.
Every second, 127 new devices connect to the internet. You can feel it happening. Our digital world expanding with every breath. We're entering a whole new era of connectivity, and MediaCom will be ready to power it with one of the nation's first 10G platforms. We'll be bringing you more speed, more capacity, more security, and the power to do more than you ever dreamed possible.
Welcome back to Surviving Bad. I'm your host, Peter Komendowski, and we're talking with Joy and Maggie about the dangers coming to Iowa that have already begun to appear in other states. And this is some good science pointing to dangerous consequences. Joy, let's flush this out a little bit from your point of view, working with people in your community. How do you see a path to remedying this sort of battle? It's David and Goliath. I mean, the Goliath is a ton of advertising money, a ton of big businesses, all trying to promote the idea that this is safe and healthy and everything is good. And prevention specialists are at the front line. They're in the trenches. So you know that that's not true, but you're fighting Goliath. How do you do it?
Exactly. And just recently, as a part of our grant, we had to do a community assessment. And we were talking to parents and community leaders about how ready they were to address the issue of marijuana use in their youth. The number one answer was, well, at least it's just marijuana. And it was one of those kind of shocking things to my frame of mind because of my work, of course. And I have to always remember not everybody's in this work, but the idea that there's an at least comment about it. It's just marijuana. And so we have a lot of education to do and to recognize, as Maggie said, that this is not grandma's marijuana. This is an entirely different thing. In fact, the marijuana people find in the ditches, I think the industry calls crap or junk because it has no THC in it. So they're not using that. So that's a big part of it, is simply education based in science from a reliable source. So the other thing we have to do then is help people recognize what is a reliable source and to be able to question. When I was a kid, I grew up in Minnesota and we had Ham's beer, which used the catchphrase, from the land of sky blue waters. Now, doesn't that sound nice, right? And you had to sort of break that down. It said nothing about the beer, but it's from the land of sky blue waters, like my background here. That sounds nice. That sounds harmless, right? So again, engaging people with the critical thinking and recognizing that the industry uses the cigarette papers, right? We knew that cigarettes have been toxic. We've known that for a long time, but there's a whole manual on how the industry marketed something they knew was dangerous to people because it was about making money. And so engaging those critical thinking skills, engaging policymakers to actually think about what they're doing, about zoning, about figuring out how this should be available in advertising on the streets, and how, we even have signs now, kratom, organic kratom, because that sounds nice too, doesn't it? Organic sounds safe and healthy. So when we're dealing about this, we have to talk about the circles of influence around kids. So not only is it what they see in their neighborhoods, what they hear on social media, what they read on social media, also what they're hearing from parents. And educating the adults in their lives as well to teach them actual true information.
Yeah, those are really great points. Now you mentioned the key phrase there, policy makers. And a lot of people in the prevention community are saying we've been failed by those policy makers because they haven't put in enough safeguards. And Maggie, you're a little bit of an expert on this. Why don't you share some of your ideas there?
Sure. Well, again, going back to what happens in states that have put it to a ballot, at that point, it's very hard for policymakers to create the rules around something that gets put into the state constitution. So my sympathies with those policymakers. When it comes to what policymakers are doing with, say, a medical program, they have my sympathies because a lot of times what they're hearing is, this is something that could help me, or this is something that does help me. And how dare you make me out to be a criminal for wanting to do something that relieves my symptoms. And I think we have a lot of very well-meaning people who, don't have the time and the energy to become experts in this. And so they're hearing from the loudest voices, which are telling them, give me what I want. Give me something that's going to help relieve my symptoms. So I know that can be frustrating. On the other side of that, though, we see that it is, just like we said, relieving symptoms, not addressing the issues. And we also see that there is this effort from a very large, powerful industry. Like you said, the Goliath of David and Goliath. And the industry has all the time in the world and lots of money to push those policymakers into saying, this is how we're going to make it accessible. This is all the great things it's doing for people. There's nothing wrong going on here. Everything's good. People are getting relief. Look, your state's making some tax money. Isn't this great? Just keep going with it and even expand it so that things keep going better. And the way you expand that is you infringe on public health. That's the bottom line. It's going to be increasing the number of people using for illicit problems. I think it would be one thing if this happened in a vacuum and no one ever heard about it. And then if people just happened to be buying their medical CBD or their THC and no one ever really found out about it, we wouldn't see some of the same issues that we do when it gets on the news. People are being interviewed. They're talking about how healthy it is. And again, that trickles down to our youth and what they hear about it.
That's a great point. We're going to take a short break, and we're going to ask Joy and Maggie to share some final comments, insights, and advice that can help you understand a little bit better this complex situation around marijuana in Iowa. See you all after the break.
Today, more than ever, you need fast, reliable internet. At MediaCom, we want you to know you can count on us. Our fiber-powered 100% gigabit technology network was built for the future. We have enormous capacity and power and 99.99% network reliability. So even though these are uncertain times, we're prepared, and you can be certain we'll keep your world connected. Every second, 127 new devices connect to the internet. You can feel it happening, our digital world expanding with every breath. We're entering a whole new era of connectivity, and MediaCom will be ready to power it with one of the nation's first 10G platforms. We'll be bringing you more speed, more capacity, more security, and the power to do more than you ever dreamed possible.
Today on Surviving Bad, we're talking about the failure of marijuana policy and the disaster that appears to be unfolding in Iowa. Can it be prevented? Let's hear what final comments our guests have to share with us. Maggie, starting with you, give us your word.
Again, I'm hoping that it can. First, we have to see the industry for what it is. And unfortunately, the industry does not care about us, our ailments, doesn't care about our kids. They care about money and making money. And if they cared about kids, they would be helping people like Laura Stack with Johnny's Ambassadors. Her son died by suicide after abusing very high potency THC products and is no longer with us. And that's a tragedy that Laura has to live with for the rest of her life. Everyone that loved Johnny has to live with. And I don't don't think Iowans want to have to live that way. I don't think we want to lose those who we really care about because we chose to believe this industry.
You know, those are great points. And Joy?
Yeah, I think it's just important to recognize the industry and policymakers have a responsibility, but they're not going to take it. We need to be recognizing that within our communities of being informed. You know, language matters. When we hear words like recreational use, we really should be saying stuff like adult use, since we know 90% of addiction starts in the teens. And the prefrontal cortex of the teens, our teens around us, doesn't recognize consequences other than not fitting in. And so when we have an industry that knows that and uses that, we need to educate ourselves about how that message is coming across. And I think it's important to recognize the industry certainly isn't going to tell you that the use of THC can, make you lose 6 to 8 IQ points, which is huge, and those don't rebound. And so when we're talking about youth health, which we all should be concerned about, whether we have kids or not, we need to recognize that this is an industry that preys on the vulnerabilities of the adolescent brain in order to create people that are going to become dependent on a product that is making a few people very rich. And so we need to be able to use our voice and our vote to be able to make that clear that we're more concerned about perhaps our neighbors than maybe ourselves.
You know, there are some things that the research is showing, and I'm going to drop on you here with just a little bit of time. The increase of psychosis in teenagers, of schizophrenia, suicides, and then even a scarier one, fetal marijuana syndrome, where users of these CBD products with THC are actually affecting very negatively a young fetus. And very few people recognize those correlations, and the industry tries to dismiss them. Mm-hmm. But you face these things every day, don't you?
Right. The kids that we interact with, I mean, we've all heard about fetal alcohol spectrum disorder and how that affects the kid's ability to think, to reason, to regulate, self-regulate. And we're having more and more often THC-affected infants born because mothers are being told to use THC to help with morning sickness. And very early exposure in utero affects the way the brain develops. And that's something that child's going to have to live with for the rest of their life, something that they had nothing to do with.
Well, I thank you both for being here today, sharing these valid points. This is a conversation that should be longer and should be growing in our communities to deal with this potential threat in Iowa so we don't suffer the same kind of consequences like an opioid epidemic when it comes to marijuana. Thank you all for joining us today. Check out our website at healthyiowa.org and keep your eye on MediaCom MC22 for our next episode of Surviving Bad, where we explore stories of survival, hope, and inspiration. On MediaCom MC22, your local programming leader.